Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another installment from our series Straight from the Horse's Mouth. Today's webinar focuses on materiality, from engaging with key stakeholders to informing strategy. There are more than a dozen ways to use materiality that go beyond its general use as a reporting exercise. Here's a sneak preview.
The one thing to really remember is there is not a one-size-fits-all.
It's important to, realise also that material issues are not entirely static, right? Stakeholder perceptions can change. The next step that's certainly useful and important through the materiality process is to present and feedback your learnings, to make use of those learnings into business strategy, ambition, targets and goals. And the closer the material issue is to the spine of the fish, the more material it was, the greater importance our stakeholders were placing on it.
It's not a get started now and we've got all year. No, give yourselves a timeline, because otherwise it will drag out forever.
But the challenge also is it doesn't stop there. The relationship continues.
Peter provides first-hand insights from their mature approach to materiality, which has helped shape Sanford's award-winning integrated reports for several years. With that, let's get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, 5 Ways to Take Materiality to the Next Level. I'm excited to be here for another installment of our Straight from the Horse's Mouth webinar series, Insights from Experts in 30 Minutes. Today, it's my real pleasure to have Peter Longdill, General Manager for Sustainability at Sanford, with me, talking about their sustainability and their materiality assessment journey. I have just a few slides to really set the scene, and then I will hand over to Peter very shortly. I'd be very curious to know, what is your experience in materiality assessment? I've prepared a little poll for you. Question is, where on the materiality assessment journey are you? Are you just about to get started? You've done your first one, you've been doing it for several years, and you haven't done anything yet. What we can see is we have about half, we're about to get started, we've done our first one, so you might be looking for a few additional tips, and quite a few haven't done anything yet. So what are you trying to achieve with it? Is it for sustainability journey, overall business strategy, engaging with stakeholders? Is it just a reporting exercise, or you don't know yet? Those are the options. In my view, it really is about quite a few things. And we said 5 things. I've got 6 here, and I'm sure there are more. It's about identifying risks and opportunities as both sides of the ledger. It is also a compliant thing to satisfy ASX and NZX reporting requirements. It is about engaging with stakeholders. It's about increasing the value of your activities, because once you know how important those topics are to your stakeholders, you can actually do something about them and feed back to your stakeholders. So we've got communication, but also actual engagement. They're 2 different things. And then we've got develop sustainability, actually in brackets, policy and strategy, because it can be both. It can feed into the overall business strategy as well. And what we think is that really a key part is real stakeholder engagement. And our recommendation usually is to look at broad stakeholder groups. So look at the external stakeholders looking in on your business. Those would be your clients, your local communities, your Indigenous communities. I've got here iwi as a New Zealand example, NGOs, peers. But then you also have your internal stakeholders looking out. How are we seen? How do we want to be seen? And that's your directors, your contractors as well, your regional staff, someone who's just started as an apprentice. Now, that's quite a few groups. And the one thing to really remember is there is not a one-size-fits-all. It needs to be tailored to your specific stakeholder groups. What I quite like is looking at the whole range of benefits and the process of materiality assessment. And I use a quote from Alice in Wonderland. And that is from the dodo bird. It's backward, forward, outward, inward. It's bottom to the top. There is never a beginning. There will never be a stop. And into materiality, that translates to me as backward, forward, outward, inward. It's about review. What have we done? About strategy going forward. It's about external stakeholders looking in, internal stakeholders looking out. And it's bottom to the top. That would be stakeholders at all levels. As I said before, the apprentice who has only just started, or a director who's been with the business since get-go. All levels, from the bottom to the top, never a beginning. Why is that? Because there is always existing relationships and existing work that you can build on. It is never a blank piece of paper. You already have something that you can work with, but then there can never be a stop. It's a start of an ongoing journey. Once you're on the journey, you will go because your stakeholders will want to know what's next, what have you actually done about it? And that's enough for me. A brief overview of how I think materiality can really add value and a little bit about the process. And now it's my real pleasure to hand over to Peter at Sanford, who's General Manager for Sustainability there. And I know that Sanford have been on the journey for a long time. Over to you, Peter. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara, and good afternoon, everybody. I've got a few slides here to talk about Sanford, who we are, and our journey with materiality and our overview of things. So starting out with a little bit of an overview of who Sanford is. We're a company with over 150 years of heritage in New Zealand. From our founder, Albert Sanford, we've got just over 1,387 people contributing towards our success. We are a vertically integrated seafood company with operations and processing sites spread across New Zealand. Each site has a particular focus, and we've also got innovation centres as well. We've got a mix of fishing and aquaculture vessels, and we spread ourselves across both the deep water and inshore space, landing fish in both frozen and fresh forms. We have a number of aquaculture farms where we grow both mussels and salmon, and they range across the country from Great Barrier Island to Coromandel, further Thames, the top of the South Island, Canterbury, and also Stewart Island. Sustainability has been a centrepiece of our operations for over 20 years, and that's founded upon our approach towards the natural resources which we rely upon for our business. So in relation to materiality, I really sort of quite like this quote here, because I think for me, it strikes to the heart of what materiality is and why we might be interested in it and why we do it, why we apply it toward our sustainability strategy and also our business strategy as a whole. It's really about determining what matters most for us as a company and for our stakeholders that we affect or are affected by us, and it gives us guidance in terms of what we should be doing about that. So in terms of the process that we follow for our materiality process, if I look at it first of all in terms of those first three bullets there, we look towards three principles, if you like, and first is inclusivity of stakeholders, and that's about considering the range of people who affect or are affected by our operations. So that's a little bit of Barbara's inward and outward look, both people that we affect and who affect us. We then go through the materiality process, that's what we're talking about today, to help us identify and be clear about the issues that matter to the organisation. And then the next principle, if you like, is responsiveness. And that's what we do after the materiality process. how we're dealing with the information we gain and what our stakeholders tell us, and how that's used to influence our strategy. And then how do we communicate that back to our stakeholders and interested parties. In terms of that first point, stakeholder engagement, it's important at that stage to essentially set out the why, the what, and the who of why we are doing this engagement and why we might want to engage with our stakeholders. That is a really key step to do, I think, at the outset, and if possible, connect that right back to your strategy and your operations. The second one is defining the scope of what you might want to talk about with your stakeholders. What parts of the operation or the business activity do you plan to cover? And also, what are the timeframes for that engagement with those stakeholders? Then it's a process of identifying your stakeholders. There was a good slide earlier from Barbara, and it's, in an ideal world, we establish a process to actually identify those stakeholders and definitely think beyond just customers themselves. We need to consider that relevant stakeholders are individuals or groups that could be affected by our organisation, our activities, or our products or services. And we can also categorise them initially in that earlier process, whether it be community groups, NGOs, customers, Indigenous groups, to ensure that when we go through that stakeholder process, we do canvass diverse and different viewpoints and perspectives. As examples in the past, what we have done, we've included both small and large customers of ours. We've included owners and investors in the company, community groups where we operate, interest groups and NGOs, competitors even, suppliers, as well as our own people. Then I've got this slide here. It's important to, I guess, realise also that material issues are not entirely static. Right? Stakeholder perceptions can change over time. There could be internal changes to the organisation, such as a new strategy or new business lines, or in a stakeholder setting. There could be external changes which are relevant for material issues, right? We're all familiar with a global pandemic that may have changed the landscape. So it is important to know views change. It's a process that we're on, but it's also important to find a balance in terms of levels of effort and repetition. Sanford have repeated our materiality process in interviews or workshops on an annual basis since 2017, and we've seen slight shifts in emphasis and focus and what was important through those years. That generally we've seen those top three material issues for us, which are the health and safety of our workers, food safety and quality of our products, and sustainable seafood. They've been consistently there as the top three issues amongst that process. So we are aware things can change, things are dynamic, and it's a matter of, I guess, right-sizing or aligning your strategy over time to some of those changes. The next step that's certainly useful and important through the materiality process is to present and feedback your learnings, to make use of those learnings into business strategy, ambition, targets and goals. The most traditional way, I guess, of presenting materiality results is through a two-dimensional plot where you have the topic's importance for stakeholders on one axis and potential business influence on the other, and that's a representation on the top left of the screen. But you could also go as simple as essentially just an ordered list of topics, a listed rank. Based on the feedback you receive. It can be useful to look for interesting and engaging ways to feedback the materiality results. And I've got a few examples here. in the bottom left and the top right of different ways that Sanford have done that in the past. The bottom left is something called the Materiality Radar, where we have the material issues around the outside, and then the lines representing either the stakeholders' concern or the potential impact to business of those various material topics. And also on that top right-hand side, a fishbone diagram to present the results of our materiality feedback. And in that one, we've essentially got the material issues aligned with our 6 pillars of our business strategy. And the relevant material issues are aligned to those strategic pillars. And the closer the material issue is to the spine of the fish, the more material it was, the greater importance our stakeholders were placing on it. So that was an engaging way for us to communicate some of those results. I've also used in the past simple word clouds like in the bottom right. This particular one representing the most frequently used words in the feedback from stakeholders in terms of their visions for the future of our company and the seafood sector as a whole. Those learnings are important to share both externally in terms of disclosure, but also internally within the business. I've had great success and good buy-in internally by essentially sharing these stories, letting people know in the business, hey, this is the feedback we're getting from our stakeholders in terms of what matters. Beyond that, use the material topics and the items that you get there to guide strategy and strategic goals. That's sort of, I guess, the next level after the materiality in terms of linking it back to what you are trying to achieve in the business, and explain those links through your reporting and communications. That's a key useful end point or sort of closing the loop, if you like, before you go back and restart again at the right time. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was really, really insightful. And what I liked a lot was the why, the what, and the who. That to me is a really good summary of what do we need to consider when we start a materiality project? Why? What are we trying to find out? Who do we need to engage with? And I think those will then, I also like your quote at the beginning, what matters most? Do that. And the materiality assessment, I think, finds out what that is. And it really, if you look at it that way, it moves away from being we need to do a sustainability report, we need to do materiality assessment. Yeah, that is a nice side benefit that you can report on it in your report. And I think, so having been with Sanford on the journey for a few years, I think you really, really are a great example of integrating the results into your overall strategy rather than do it as a tick box for the report. So
yeah, no, look, and that simple quote, the breaking it down to that sort of almost one sentence statement is such an easy way and effective way to communicate to people who might otherwise think that this is a different exercise. Also defining the why, the who, the what, that becomes, doing that up front becomes a very useful exercise when you then go to talk to the stakeholders, to set the context for them. Why are we here? What do we plan to do with it? Who else are we talking to? They're all and why? They're all the typical questions that might come up when you do start speaking with those stakeholders.
Someone else asked, do we have to start, how long does it take? Do we have to start now if we want it to be done for our report next year in July for next financial year? Is it too early? And no, it's not too early because of all the other benefits. It is actually a good time to do it now, even if your report is only due next year and you've just done one, because it can help inform what are you going to do throughout the year. and then you can report on it. So yeah, move it away from it being a report-related exercise, really. Because then it also becomes almost irrelevant whether you want to do an integrated report or a GRI report or just simply a combined sustainability annual report, because the differences and the impact on how you do the materiality assessment are negligible. What you want to do is say, who do we want to talk to? What do we want to find out? And how do these topics impact on our business? That's really the three rules, I think.
I mean, you can really, I guess, depending on what sort of resource you want to put into it, you could make it take you could squeeze it into a short period of time, or let it take a little bit longer. I would say it's definitely beneficial to put those boundaries on it at the outset and set your expectations around what you're trying to achieve, because at the end of the day, you do need to draw a line and then evaluate the results, and then start another process, another point down the future. If it's a sort of an amorphous timeline, then you might not really get to the level of saying, hey, here's the material issues and this is how we're going to put them into the to work or guide us with our other decision making.
Yeah. You're right. It's not a get started now and we've got all year. No, give yourselves a timeline, because otherwise it will drag out forever. But I think one thing that you've also mentioned is you've been refreshing it every year, but you don't do a full materiality assessment every year, do you? Sometimes you just do a little refresh. So it's not actually necessary to do a full one every year, right?
That's right. The way, I guess, our approach has been, we did quite a big one the first year, and then we said, all right, how can we supplement that? We had the young girl on the cover of the annual report that was in one of the slides there, Charlie. She's the granddaughter of one of our skippers. But we thought, let's take a particular voice of the youth and really put a focus on them as stakeholders on a group of youth, and really use that to put a new perspective or a new twist on attitudes and approaches and how they value different subjects and matters for us. And then the next year it was I think a regional focus out in the regions where we operate. So there was a slight, I guess, evolution and an introduction of new ideas each year, and we've sort of looked to continue that as best we can.
Someone else is asking, are you using your materiality assessment to actually link it to the business strategy as well?
Yeah, look, that can be one of the challenging parts to this, where you do come out to it, and that's where I think the feeding back into the business and communicating those results becomes one of your most valuable tools. We certainly are using it. There's always evolution that can be made, but we're trying to use this to guide, and it's through the GRI. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but the Global Reporting Initiative reporting framework guides you to use those material issues as your sort of objectives and targets towards what the business would like to achieve. So in that way, we are, linking it through and obviously continually looking for improvements through that process as well.
So that's the real business value of it. Were actual compliance issues like the NZX guidance, was that a trigger as well to get started?
Yep, certainly. We have the NZX, for listed companies, we've got certain requirements there. And there's, I guess, evolution in those aspects all the time as well. A lot of, both global and national bodies with various requirements and regulation setting. That global reporting initiative is a good place to start, and that does require that each, if you're reporting in accordance with their framework, that businesses do identify these material topics and make certain disclosures in relation to them.
Did materiality assessment help to reinforce stakeholder relationships? And if so, can you bring in examples? Well, take this as our last question for you.
Sure. In terms of, I think it certainly helped us build and reinforce relationships with stakeholders that we might not have initially, anticipated that it would. Let's say NGO groups and community groups. It's having a business go out and speak with them and hear their views. That's empowering and extremely, sort of valued by the community. We found that when we went to do that, they appreciated it. But the challenge also is it doesn't stop there. The relationship continues. NGOs, right? We have existing relationships with some NGOs. We might have quite different viewpoints on a number of things, but it does provide, this sort of process provides a forum for us to, have good discussion and hear each other's viewpoints and values and determine, how best to go on. So without that sort of, it provides a forum for those sort of discussions which might not otherwise be present. So that's really quite useful.
Thanks again. Thank you so much. That was a really additional valuable point. And I think it reinforces there is never a beginning. There can never be a stop. Once you're on the journey, starting engaging with your stakeholders, they will expect you to feed back. So we are looking forward to continue working with you on your journey. And your audience, if you have further questions, fire them through by email and we will be able to get back to you. Thanks again, Peter, and have a good afternoon, everyone.